Every mystery has an answer, but some have way more than one possibility. I'm Yvette Gentile.
And I'm her sister, Rasha Pecoraro. Every week on our podcast, So Supernatural, we invite you to explore the unknown and to consider the many theories behind each unsolved mystery.
We'll guide you as you question the world you think you know, through investigations into spine-chilling hauntings, unexplainable encounters, strange disappearances, and so much more.
So, if you're ready to be haunted by stories of the unsolved and of the unknown, listen, if you dare, to So Supernatural every Friday wherever you get your podcasts.
Hi, Crime Junkies. I'm your host, Ashley Flowers.
And I'm Britt.
And the story I have for you today, I'm going to warn you, it's going to be hard to hear. But when people don't listen to the tough stuff, that is what lets a system that doesn't protect kids perpetuate. So I beg you to hear today's story about a first grader found unresponsive in his own home in Grand Prairie, Texas. The explanation his stepfather gives is that he got trapped inside a toy chest and just couldn't get out, couldn't breathe. But when that theory is put to the test, it doesn't add up. Yet no one has been held responsible for this young boy's death. So his father is making sure that no one forgets his son's name. This is the story of Joseph Jojo King III. Joseph King Jr.'s world collapsed a few weeks before the rest of us were rocked by lockdowns and a global pandemic. It was February 23rd, 2020, when his phone rang just before midnight. No good call comes at that hour, so he was bracing himself when he answered. But there was nothing that could have prepared him for what was said. His 6-year-old son, Joseph King III, his Jojo, was unconscious and at the hospital. Now, there wasn't much more information for him at that time. This is all pretty recent, but Dad, lives in Georgia, and Jojo lives with his mom and stepfather in Texas, so he needs to get on the first flight out to be with his son. Joseph is in knots as he makes the trip, and he still doesn't know much. I mean, he had just FaceTime with his son the day before. He was perfectly healthy and happy, pumped about starting baseball. Like, how could this possibly be happening? How could he be in the hospital now? Now, when he finally arrives at Children's Medical Center in Dallas that next morning, it is even worse than he imagined. Jojo is not just unconscious, he is on life support. Doctors say that he suffered a brain injury from lack of oxygen, likely from being stuck in a toy chest where his stepdad found him.
Like a toy box thing? Like he climbed in and accidentally got stuck?
That is what his stepdad is saying. Brandon Hale, the stepdad, says that he was home with Jojo when it happened. Jojo's mom, Jessica, basically left for a baby shower at around 2:30 p.m. And then at some point that afternoon, Brandon took this short nap, but he was woken up not too long after, just before 5 o'clock, because he got a text from his wife reminding him to give Jojo his medication. So he said he searched the townhouse and he couldn't find Jojo anywhere. So he even texted Jessica back like 5 minutes later asking if Jojo was with her.
Which doesn't make sense because she's not going to text you about giving him medicine if she has him.
I don't know what he was thinking, but no, he is obviously not with mom. So then Brandon went downstairs to check the front door, make sure that Jojo didn't leave while he was sleeping, but he saw that it was still locked. So he goes back upstairs, and for some unknown reason, he decided to check in the toy chest in Jojo's bedroom. And there he was, not breathing. Now, Jojo's dad, Joseph, is standing there beside his son's hospital bed, listening to Brandon's explanation. And to him, something just doesn't sound right. And he's not just thinking that as a dad, he's thinking that as a detective. Because Joseph just so happens to be a homicide detective in Atlanta. And hearing that his son was home alone with Brandon when something went down immediately sets off alarm bells. Because he knows something you don't. Let me rewind almost a year, back to March of 2019. One day, Jojo showed up to school and he couldn't sit down. Teachers noticed that he had a bit of a limp as well, so they pull him aside. And what becomes visible up close is that there are multiple loop-shaped bruises across the backs of both of his thighs. When they ask him about it, Jojo tells them that his dad, meaning his stepfather, Brandon, beat him with a belt. So police came, they responded, and the Texas Department of Family Protective Services, which is DFPS, they opened an investigation. Brandon admits that he used a belt, And it sounds like he and Jessica both describe using some forms of corporal punishments as discipline. But DFPS ends up ruling reason to believe for physical abuse.
That's officially documented then.
Oh yeah, reason to believe means that DFPS determined abuse did occur. And so Brandon gets indicted for injury to a child. But here is where it gets complicated. Joseph, JoJo's biological father living in Georgia, isn't notified about any of this right away. Even though he had been active in his son's life, he saw him over summers and during holidays, talked to him nearly every day. But as soon as he does find out, he told our team that he started trying to get custody. I mean, he goes right to DFPS, the very people who say that they have reason to believe that this young boy is being abused in his home. But he says that they told him they don't remove children in situations like this.
In situations like this,
With abuse. That's what they said. So he tried going through family court. He tried going to detectives at Grand Prairie PD, but they point him right back to DFPS. So as kind of a last resort, a way to protect his son from far away, he applied for a protective order on behalf of JoJo. But according to him, a judge wouldn't sign it because JoJo lived in the same home as the person that he was asking for him to be protected from, aka Brandon.
Domestic abuse happens in the home all the time. Like, that's what domestic means.
I know.
The argument isn't even logical.
I know.
So basically, if Joseph wanted to get JoJo out of that home, the really only option that they left him with is to kidnap JoJo, and they'd have to go on the run because he'd be a fugitive as the non-custodial parent.
Which is not much of an option, is
No.
it? And Britt, this is the part that stays with him. Joseph said that he remembers literally asking officials, does my son have to die for someone to help us? That question now echoes in the ICU too, because the man who admitted to striking his son with a belt is the same man who was home alone with him when he stopped breathing. And he's able to stand there in that hospital on that day in February 2020, because even though DFPS said that they had reason to believe Brandon abused JoJo in 2019, they closed the case, documenting that the risk level was low. He got 4 years deferred adjudication probation. Translation: no formal conviction as long as he complies with his probation. That is 0 jail time. So the fact that Brandon was home alone with JoJo, back living in the house with him at the time that this happened, apparently all of that is by the books as far as the court and DFPS were concerned. Doctors explained that JoJo's brain had suffered severe swelling from prolonged lack of oxygen. They tell Joseph the next 48 to 72 hours are going to determine everything for JoJo. But all he can do now is wait. But as he waits, he can't help replaying his question. Does my son have to die for someone to help us? And he's also replaying the story he heard from Brandon. And the more times it loops in his brain, and the more information he starts collecting from doctors and from police, the less Brandon's story makes sense to Joseph the dad and Joseph the detective. From the very start, the timeline Brandon gave seems shaky to Joseph. Initially, the story that Brandon told made it seem like he just took this quick little cat nap, like 30 minutes or so. That doesn't make sense to Joseph. The doctor told him JoJo was like that because of prolonged lack of oxygen.
Right.
Now, conveniently, Brandon's story morphs over time. That 30-minute nap changes to, I don't know how long it was, to eventually saying that he was sleeping nearly the entire afternoon while he was supposed to be supervising JoJo. And then there is this whole weird thing with CPR. At first, Brandon's story was that he pulled JoJo from the chest, performed CPR, and called 911. But Joseph finds out that when Brandon called 911 at 4:58 p.m., the dispatcher had to tell him to put JoJo on the floor and begin compressions. But when she is spoken to, she says from what she could tell, like over the phone or whatever, it didn't seem like he was actually doing it. And when EMS arrived by 5:11, they documented that he is not doing CPR compressions. First responders find JoJo not breathing, without a pulse, while Brandon is just screaming, God no, and crying, rocking, hitting the wall.
Which could just be panic, though.
Sure, but how about this? As far as we know, nowhere in Brandon's story does he offer up an explanation for why JoJo is wet. And I'm not just talking like sweaty from being stuck inside a constricted space for a long time. Wet from his nose all the way down to his hips. And police also document a wet towel in the bathroom. And the bed is wet.
I mean, how wet are we talking here?
I don't know exactly because as of this recording, we haven't gotten any photos or body cam footage from the Grand Prairie Police Department in response to our FOIA. But I will say, at least some of the wetness, at least some of the wetness on JoJo himself is urine. Because responding officers say that he smells of urine, which makes sense to me. I mean, especially for a little kid trapped in any way or dying, like your body is panicking, or as you lose consciousness, you sometimes can lose control of bodily functions. But the reports don't fully explain why that other stuff would be wet. But in Brandon's version of events, none of this makes sense anyway, because even if JoJo lost control of his bladder and all of the wetness on him was urine, that would probably happen when he's in the chest, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's nothing mentioned in Brandon's statement like, oh, JoJo had just taken a bath earlier. It wasn't like, oh, I knocked over water while trying to save him. It was just, he was in the toy chest, like, full stop. And it doesn't even appear like he tries to address the wetness stuff.
So, putting the wetness aside for a sec, say Brandon really is napping, and JoJo is getting himself and other things wet for, like, whatever reason. I've had a first grader, I have a second grader. There are wildness that happens. The thing I'm having a hard time understanding is that if he accidentally goes in the toy chest, why can't he get himself out? Like, he's 6? Like, he's not like a baby or even a little toddler.
So it does seem with this specific toy chest that if it shuts, that it would automatically lock.
Oh.
So, like, he wouldn't have been able to open it back up on his own from the inside. You can only do that from the outside. But to your point, like, I'm still trying to figure out why he couldn't have gotten help even if that, I mean, we know that's how it worked, but even if that's what happened, because Joseph, he's like this big athletic kid. You would think that he would at least be able to bang, yell, scream, make some noise. And this isn't a huge townhome or anything. I mean, like, I know Brandon's sleeping. I don't know how hard of a sleeper he is.
Yeah.
And he's, out for maybe some or all of the afternoon. But another thought that crossed Joseph's mind is that maybe JoJo had been incapacitated in some way. Now, the suggestion that Joseph said, his ex Jessica kind of threw out there, was that maybe JoJo had jumped from the bed, hit the chest, the top slammed shut, and then he got knocked out or something, somehow.
Already feels kind of improbable.
Yeah, and it doesn't line up with his known injuries. According to Joseph's doctor, they tell him there doesn't seem to be any significant head injuries that would explain JoJo's, falling unconscious. And there was no obstruction blocking his airway either, as if he had choked on a small toy or something while he was in there that, kept him from crying out for help.
So, I don't know what's worse, thinking of him, trapped in there unconscious or trapped in there, crying to get out and no one's helping him.
The same question echoes, right? Does my son have to die for someone to help us? This is not really a question that you want to get an answer to while your son is on life support. The days pass. The swelling in JoJo's brain doesn't go down, and he never regains consciousness. On February 27, 2020, doctors pronounced JoJo dead. Joseph made the decision to donate his son's organs when he died, because it is the only thing he can do that makes him feel like some ounce of good could come out of something so horrific. And then after that, he went to work for his son. Because the autopsy that was performed came back as manner of death undetermined, with the cause of death listed as global hypoxic encephalopathy. And they say it was due to smothering with absence of oxygen following prolonged entrapment in a sealed toy chest.
That sounds like tragic accident territory, maybe.
In the wrong hands, I think it would be. But Joseph isn't gonna just walk away because of an undetermined ruling. He claims that he had to push for Grand Prairie PD to have a different detective put fresh eyes on his son's case. And thank God he did, and thank God they listened. Because as part of this fresh look, they actually decide to test the Emmy's ruling. That whole part about lack of oxygen because he was in a sealed toy chest. Because was it even sealed?
Wait, I thought they already checked that. And, they know it locks if it shuts, automatically.
They know that it automatically locks if it shuts. But by the time of JoJo's autopsy, it doesn't seem like anyone had actually tested whether or not air could flow through when it was shut and
locked versus like airtight.
And guess what? They test this thing by putting a light inside. And light shines through the cracks. Which means if light can get through the cracks...
That means air has got to be able to pass through too.
Precisely. So it was not sealed like the autopsy said. Then, while investigators are at it, they also try to recreate the scene. They use a mannequin similar in size to JoJo, and this thing barely fits inside the chest at all because the chest wasn't empty when Brandon says he went in there. There were toys inside of it. Specifically, there was this large Batman doll that took up a significant amount of space. So, with all of this new info, the medical examiner actually goes back to amend the report. In non-medical jargon, it now says that JoJo died from lack of oxygen, but they just can't say how.
Undetermined.
Still undetermined. But there is one more addition to this report that makes Joseph stop cold in his tracks and just have this almost like I freaking knew it moment, right? Like this aha moment. And here, Brett, I'm actually just gonna have you read it because you'll know exactly what he was feeling.
Responding officers reported the decedent was wet when they arrived on the scene, and there was concern for possible homicidal drowning.
Now, it's not a ruling, just a concern for homicidal drowning. But it's concern enough for investigators to reassess everything, to go back to the drawing board and to try and figure out if JoJo didn't die from being trapped in a toy chest, then what really killed him? Joseph couldn't be side by side with investigators as they worked to find the answers. They had to keep him at an arm's length to protect their investigation. So he would have to wait until 2023 to hear any other possible theory about what could have happened to his son. Now this time, Joseph is back in Texas. Not at a hospital, but in a courthouse in Tarrant County. That is where Brandon is going before a judge. And he's not going before a judge for murder charges. This isn't a trial. This is a hearing to determine whether he violated his probation.
What?
He was still on probation for the 2019 belt incident when JoJo died in 2020.
Oh.
So basically, prosecutors believe
That when this happened...
in February of 2020 that violated the probation from that incident.
But this is 2023. It took them 3 years to get to court on this?
I don't know why it took so long. Detectives and the DA's office didn't talk to us for this episode. But remember, it did take a different detective digging into this case to even get some of these answers. So I assume that took some time to get sorted. Then Joseph thinks maybe because the manner of death was undetermined, I don't know, at some point, they probably just figured that a probation violation would be much easier to get this guy on. Let's all try to put him away for some time for something.
Yeah.
But the easy thing is not always the right thing. And being in law enforcement himself, Joseph says that he is certainly surprised that they didn't go for more by the time 2023 rolls around. Because once he hears what it is that they presented under oath, he is even more sure that his son did not die in the way that Brandon claimed. At this hearing, the state doesn't have to prove anything beyond a reasonable doubt. They just have to convince the judge that Brandon committed a new offense while on probation. That's it. And to do that, they walk through the evidence again. Some of the same things that Joseph heard before. Information regarding questionable timeline, the possibility that life-saving measures weren't attempted despite instructions from 911 to do so, and Brandon's own statement that he did. Now, Brandon ends up testifying that he did give breaths and compressions with one hand. But then later, he reportedly stated that he felt JoJo was already dead and didn't really see the point. So again, statements don't quite line up. But then comes the new stuff, and it all mainly focuses on the weirdest and most glaringly strange part of this case. The fact that JoJo and some parts of this scene were wet. Now, the initial responding deputy takes the stand, and we finally get details about what he witnessed. In the bathroom, he saw that the toys in the bathtub were wet, and there is a towel at the base of the toilet that is wet too. Now, based on the floor plan of this place, it looks like the toilet is right up next to the tub. And while there's no way to tell how the things in the bath got wet, what he does notice is that the toilet bowl itself, the water in it, it appears like it's half full. as if an object had been placed into it. That's the language that he uses.
An object like the toys?
I don't know if they were ever in the toilet, but I think it would have taken something larger to displace half the water in the toilet. And I don't think it takes Sherlock to see what he's trying to suggest here based on how he describes Jojo. Now remember, he says that Jojo is wet from the nose down to his hips. The wetness isn't around his whole body. Apparently, it is just this strip down the front of him.
Is he saying that Jojo was somehow like dunked in the toilet, or?
No, he is just saying what he saw. The toilet water is displaced and he is wet down the front of him. Now, Brandon's wife, Jojo's mom, Jessica, testifies that if the towel and the tub toys were like wet, it might have been from a bath the night before. But Joseph usually bathed between 6 and 8 p.m. This was nearly 24 hours later.
Okay, we haven't really talked about Jessica that much. Where does she stand in all of this? Like, is she siding with Brandon?
Well, in a DFPS document that we have, it states that Jessica and Brandon got an attorney